Roughly 20% of the world's oil passes through one narrow waterway. That corridor is less than 40 kilometers wide. If traffic stops, oil prices can spike within hours. Inflation can rise across multiple continents. Iran controls the northern edge of that choke point. Now, that might sound dramatic, but it's not hypothetical. Global oil demand still exceeds 100 million barrels per day, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Energy markets today are tightly interconnected. China depends heavily on Gulf crude. India does too. Japan and South Korea rely on steady shipments. Europe remains sensitive to both oil and LNG flows. So when tensions rise around the Strait of Hormuz, traders react almost immediately. Prices move before official statements are released. Insurance costs adjust. Shipping routes are reconsidered. And central banks start watching oil futures more closely. This isn't just a regional story. It's a structural pressure point in the global economy. So let's break this down properly. We'll go section by section. First, geography, then power, then risk, and finally, what this means long-term. Let's start with the map. Before we talk about power, we need to understand placement. The Strait of Hormuz connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman. Everything exported from the Persian Gulf by sea must pass through here. Now look at the narrowest point. It's roughly 33 kilometers wide. But here's what matters more. The actual shipping lanes used by tankers are much narrower. Inbound tankers use one lane, outbound tankers use another. Each is about 2 miles wide, 2 miles, for vessels carrying millions of barrels of crude oil. This creates compression, and compression creates vulnerability. There is no alternative maritime exit from the Persian Gulf. That's not an exaggeration, that's geography. Now let's quantify what moves through here. Historically, between 17 and 21 million barrels of petroleum liquids pass through the strait daily. That's roughly 1/5 of global oil consumption. 1/5. If even part of that flow is disrupted, markets feel it immediately. And it's not just crude oil. Qatar is one of the world's largest exporters of liquefied natural gas. Much of its LNG transits this same corridor, according to the International Energy Agency. So, Hormuz isn't just about fuel for cars, it's about electricity generation in multiple countries. Now let's zoom in further, because geography doesn't just create exposure, it creates leverage. Look at the northern side of the strait. That entire coastline belongs to Iran. That means Iran overlooks the shipping lanes directly. Then you add islands, Keshem Island, Hormuz Island, Larak Island. These are not random landmasses. They provide proximity, observation, staging ground potential. From elevated terrain, surveillance is easier. From close proximity, response time is shorter. Now think tactically. In open ocean, large navies dominate. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines. But confined waters change the equation. Fast attack boats become effective. Coastal missile systems matter more. Naval mines become harder to detect and more disruptive. You don't need to defeat a superpower navy, you only need to create uncertainty. And uncertainty in energy markets is expensive. That's asymmetric leverage. It's not about matching force, it's about raising risk. Hormuz became strategically critical in the 20th century as oil demand surged. Industrialization accelerated. Automobile adoption expanded. Air travel grew. Energy became foundational to economic growth. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, tanker attacks occurred in the Gulf. This period became known as the Tanker War. Shipping insurance premiums surged. Naval escorts increased. Oil prices reacted. Even without full closure, partial disruption was enough to create instability. That lesson remains embedded in strategic planning. Since then, Hormuz has been treated as a structural variable in global energy forecasting. It is built into risk models. It is factored into military deployments. It is embedded in diplomatic calculations. So when we say Iran controls a global oil lifeline, we're not being rhetorical. We're describing placement within infrastructure. Now let's shift from geography to incentives. Who benefits from this setup? Who is vulnerable? And how does this translate into influence? First, deterrence. If Iran faces military pressure, it retains the capacity to disrupt shipping. That potential response acts as a shield. Second, negotiation leverage. During nuclear negotiations, Hormuz is never far from strategic calculations. Iran does not need to announce closure. The market understands capability. Third, asymmetric economics. Iran's military budget is far smaller than that of the United States, according to SIPRI, but disruption tools are relatively inexpensive. Fast patrol craft, drones, coastal missile batteries, naval mines. In a narrow corridor, these tools become force multipliers. Low cost, high impact potential. Now look at the other side. Saudi Arabia exports major volumes via the Persian Gulf. Iraq relies heavily on Gulf terminals. Kuwait depends almost entirely on maritime routes through Hormuz. Qatar's LNG exports move through the same corridor. The UAE has invested in a bypass pipeline to Fujairah. But bypass capacity does not fully replace maritime export volume. Complete redundancy does not exist. That's structural exposure. Now, zoom out globally. China is the world's largest crude oil importer. A significant share of Chinese oil imports originates in the Gulf. India's dependency on Middle Eastern crude is substantial. Japan and South Korea are highly import-dependent economies. Europe relies on Gulf producers for both oil and LNG. So any sustained disruption in Hormuz would not be regional. It would be systemic. Oil prices influence transportation costs. Transportation costs affect food prices. Food prices affect inflation. Inflation affects monetary policy. A narrow waterway influences central bank decisions. That is structural power. The United States Navy's Fifth Fleet is headquartered in Bahrain and is responsible for maritime security in the Persian Gulf. Its mission includes ensuring freedom of navigation. Iran conducts regular naval exercises. China has increased diplomatic and economic engagement in the region. Multiple naval powers operate in proximity. Concentration increases deterrence, but concentration also increases miscalculation risk. Power here is not just about weapons, it's about presence. Now let's examine vulnerabilities, because leverage only matters if risk is credible. Risk 1, incremental disruption. Closure is dramatic. Incremental disruption is more realistic. In 2019, tanker incidents raised global concern. Even limited events increased insurance premiums. Higher insurance translates into higher transport costs, which ultimately feeds into consumer prices. Risk 2, cyber and infrastructure exposure. Modern tankers rely on digital navigation. Ports rely on networked logistics systems. Cyber attacks could disrupt scheduling or create delays. Even temporary port paralysis would slow throughput. This is often overlooked. Disruption doesn't need to be kinetic. Risk 3, energy transition pace. Renewables are expanding. Electric vehicles are increasing, according to the International Energy Agency. But global oil demand remains high. Emerging markets continue increasing energy consumption. Heavy industry remains hydrocarbon intensive. Transition timelines are long. Hormuz remains critical during that transition. Now let's consider a deeper scenario. Not dramatic closure, not full-scale war, something slower. Imagine recurring low-level incidents over several years. Insurance premiums double. Shipping firms embed permanent risk surcharges. Oil trades with a persistent geopolitical premium. Energy importing countries increase strategic reserves. Gulf states increase defense spending, according to SIPRI military expenditure database. China increases naval patrol presence to protect trade routes. The United States reinforces deployments. Multiple navies operate within confined waters. Misinterpretation becomes more likely. One incident escalates unintentionally. Markets respond instantly. Oil spikes. Inflation resurges globally. Emerging market currencies weaken. Debt servicing becomes more expensive. Political instability rises in energy-dependent states. The strait becomes a chronic stress point in the global system. Not explosive, persistent, embedded. That's escalation through erosion. Three forces will shape the strait's future: energy diversification, regional diplomacy, great power competition. If renewables scale rapidly, dependency declines gradually. If regional tensions ease, risk premiums compress. If rivalry intensifies, Hormuz becomes more militarized. Geography does not move. Shipping lanes remain narrow. Energy demand remains substantial. As long as significant oil flows through this corridor, leverage remains concentrated. Iran's position ensures continued influence, not because of scale, because of placement. The The Strait of Hormuz is a fixed structural variable in global energy architecture. Until that architecture fundamentally changes, this choke point will remain one of the most consequential pieces of geography on Earth. If tensions escalate in the Strait of Hormuz, should global powers intervene more aggressively? Or would that make instability worse? Where should the line be drawn? If you found this breakdown useful, leave your view below and subscribe for the next deep dive.